The rarest Ferrari ever built has a secret that Ferrari itself has never officially confirmed, and the one person who holds the last copy has never once shown it to the public. Not a museum. Not an auction. Not even a photograph. Just gone. And the deeper you go into this story, the more you realize this wasn't an accident, this was by design. Let's talk about the Ferrari 250 GTO. And before you say you've heard this one before, I promise you haven't heard it like this. Only 36 of these cars were ever made. 36. Between 1962 and 1964, Ferrari produced what would eventually become the single most valuable automobile in human history, and the way it happened, the reason it happened, and who ended up holding the last one involves a level of secrecy that most people just completely gloss over when they tell this story. So let's actually go there. Here's your question for the comments, and I genuinely want to know, if you owned the rarest car on earth, would you hide it or show the world? Drop it below because this story is going to change how you think about that answer. Now back to 1962. Enzo Ferrari needed to enter the 250 GTO in the FIA World Sports Car Championship under the Gran Turismo category. The rule was simple: you had to build at least 100 units of the car to qualify it as a production GT vehicle. Ferrari had built nowhere near 100. Not even close. He built 36. So how did the 250 GTO get approved? This is the part nobody really slows down on. Enzo Ferrari went to the FIA and told them the GTO was simply a continuation of the existing 250 GT, that it was an evolution of a car that already existed in sufficient numbers. He reused the older car's homologation papers. He essentially told the governing body of international motorsport that this brand new, purpose-built, handcrafted racing machine was just a mild update to something they'd already approved. And the FIA believed him. Or maybe they didn't believe him and just didn't care. Either way, the 250 GTO raced, and it won, and the lie that launched the most valuable car ever made just became part of the official record. That alone should tell you everything about how this car's story operates. Nothing about the 250 GTO is what it appears to be on the surface. And that goes way deeper than the homologation paperwork. See, Enzo Ferrari didn't just build the GTO, he controlled who could have one. This wasn't a car you could walk into a dealership and buy. There were no dealerships involved. Enzo personally approved every single buyer. He had a list of drivers, collectors, and gentlemen racers he deemed worthy, and if you weren't on that list, you weren't getting a GTO, period. Didn't matter how much money you had. Didn't matter who you knew. Enzo decided. And what's wild about that is it created this culture around the car from the very beginning where ownership wasn't just about wealth, it was about status within a world that most people don't even know exists. And by the way, if you think that level of control ended with Enzo, it didn't. Ferrari still operates a system today, still documented, still real, where if you sell certain cars without their approval, they will blacklist you. They will refuse to sell you future limited editions. They will cut you off entirely from the brand. The control Enzo built into the DNA of how Ferraris are sold, specifically the ultra-rare ones, never went away. It just got more sophisticated. Now here's where this gets genuinely uncomfortable. Of the 36 GTOs built, most of them have documented ownership histories that collectors and historians have spent decades piecing together. Most. Not all. There are GTOs whose paper trails go cold. Whose last recorded sale was private, undisclosed, transferred quietly between parties with no public record. And one of those cars, one specific chassis, has not been seen publicly in over 2 decades. Think about what that means for a second. The most valuable car ever made. A car that sold at auction in 2018 for over $70 million, that was a different chassis by the way, and there is one sitting somewhere that nobody outside of a single collector's inner circle has physically seen in more than 20 years. No photos. No shows. No verification. Just a name on a private document that most people in the collector world will only whisper about. Now if you're finding this as insane as I am, go ahead and hit like right now because we are just getting started, and what comes next is the part that makes the whole thing feel almost intentional. The collector world around the 250 GTO is not normal. These aren't just rich people who like cars. The people who own GTOs are operating at a level where a $70 million car is a portfolio asset, a negotiating chip, a piece of cultural capital that functions more like a Picasso painting than a vehicle. And some of them have no interest whatsoever in the car being seen. In fact, for certain collectors, the entire value proposition is that nobody knows they have it. The secrecy is the point. The rarity is something they actively protect by keeping the car invisible. And Ferrari, the company, has a complicated relationship with this reality. On one hand, Ferrari benefits enormously from the mystique of the GTO. Every time one sells for a record-breaking number, it elevates the entire brand. But on the other hand, Ferrari has zero legal control over what private collectors do with cars that were built over 60 years ago. They can't force someone to show the car. They can't demand it appear at Pebble Beach or Concorso di Eleganza. Once that car left the factory in Maranello in 1963 and passed through enough hands, it entered a world that even Ferrari itself can't fully see into. There's a specific thing that happens in the ultra-high-end collector world called a private provenance dispute, and several GTOs have been caught in the middle of these. What that means is two parties, sometimes more, both claiming legitimate ownership of the same car based on different chains of documentation. This has happened with GTOs. Quietly, out of court, resolved in ways that never made headlines because the people involved had every reason to keep it quiet. The last thing a collector worth hundreds of millions of dollars wants is a public legal battle over a car that draws attention to assets they'd rather not explain. And when you understand that, when you really sit with it, the fact that one GTO has been out of public view for 20-something years stops being mysterious and starts being completely logical. Someone acquired that car in a way that doesn't benefit from visibility. And that person has the resources to keep it that way indefinitely. Now I want to be honest with you here because this is the kind of story where people expect me to name the collector and point to an address and say here is the car. I can't do that. Nobody publicly can. What I can tell you is that within the circles of serious Ferrari historians and GTO provenance researchers, the existence of this undisplayed chassis is not a conspiracy theory. It is a known gap in the official record. Historians who have spent careers documenting every GTO acknowledge that the paperwork on certain chassis leads somewhere private and then just stops. What makes this darker than just a rich person hiding a toy is what it says about how history gets written for objects like this. Every time a GTO appears publicly, gets authenticated, gets bought and sold through a transparent auction, its story becomes part of the permanent record. Its provenance gets verified, photographed, documented, and preserved. But the one sitting in a private climate-controlled facility somewhere in Europe, or possibly the Middle East based on certain transfer records that have surfaced in collector circles, that car's story is frozen. Whatever happened to it after its last documented public appearance is a blank page. And if the person who holds it never surfaces it, that page stays blank forever. The history of one of the most important automobiles ever constructed just ends mid-sentence. And Ferrari knows this. Ferrari's own heritage division has attempted to verify and document every GTO in existence, and they have openly acknowledged, not in press releases obviously, but through the work of authorized historians, that complete documentation for every chassis is not something they can guarantee. There are GTOs where even Ferrari's own records have gaps. That's the dark secret hiding inside the rarest car ever built. It's not just that there are only 36. It's that the system that created the car, the secrecy Enzo built into its very existence from the beginning, the controlled access, the approved buyers, the culture of exclusivity that was designed into the 250 GTO before the first unit ever left Maranello, that same system eventually made it possible for one of them to disappear from the historical record entirely. And the person holding it isn't doing anything illegal. They're just doing exactly what the car was designed to allow. They're keeping it for themselves. The 250 GTO was never meant to be public. Enzo didn't build it to be admired by crowds. He built it to win races for the people he trusted. And somewhere, right now, one of those 36 cars is sitting in a room that most of the world will never see, being tended by staff who've signed agreements, maintained to a level of preservation that would make most museums look amateur, owned by someone who doesn't need your validation, your attention, or your $70 million. Because to them, the fact that you don't know where it is, that's not a problem. That is the whole point. The rarest Ferrari ever built isn't at a show. It isn't at an auction. It's somewhere private, with one person, exactly the way the system that created it always intended it to end up. And honestly, next time you see a Ferrari at a show and think that's the rarest thing in the room, just remember, the one nobody talks about isn't in the room at all.